The sun of Madrid was just beginning to look out among the red brick buildings when I went down to pick up the mail, like every day. The goalkeeper, Don Miguel, greeted me with his usual, "Good morning, Miss Elena," while sweeping the entrance of the building. It was a typical April morning in the Malasana neighborhood, with that fresh air that always made me thank having put a card on my flowered dress. While climbing the stairs to the third floor, he distracted the invoices and advertising, when a white envelope, without sender, caught my attention. I had no postal brand, which meant that someone had left it personally in my mailbox. The paper was of good quality, and my name was written by hand with elegant calligraphy, Elena Martinez. I stopped in the landing, next to the geraniums that my neighbor Pilar always kept blooming, and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside there was a leaf of folded paper, although it showed signs of having been wrinkled and then smoothed. The words written in her made my world stop for a moment. "Martin has had a romance with someone close to you. Ask him." The paper slipped from my hands and fell to the ground of tiles. I leaned against the wall, feeling that the air became dense and heavy. The family sounds of the neighborhood, Donna Carmen's TV with her morning soap operas, the children of the second running to go to school, the newspaper seller proclaiming the news in the corner, seemed now distant and surreal. I picked up the letter and entered my apartment, that space that Martín and I had decorated together during the last 5 years. The photos of our wedding in the church of San Ginés, the memories of our trip to Granada, the sofa where we spent the night watching movies. Everything now seemed dyed from a new and disturbing lose. I sat at the kitchen table, where the cup of coffee was still half finished. He had left early for the law firm where he worked, like every morning, after giving me a distracted kiss and promising me that he would arrive early for dinner. How many of those promises had been a lie? How many distracted kisses hid guilt? I spent the day in a nebula, trying to concentrate on my work as a professor of literature at the institute, but my mind returned again and again to the letter. My students noticed that something was not right. Maria, my most insightful student, even asked me if I was sick. I made them read 100 Years of Loneliness in silence while I contemplated the possibility that my own marriage was built on lies. During lunch, at the Berolina bar where I used to meet my best friend Lucia, I could not try a bite of the Madrid cooked that Pedro, the waiter, had insisted on serving me. Lucia noticed my mood, but I did not dare to tell him about the letter. What if she was the nearby person mentioned in the note? Paranoia began to seize me. The afternoon dragged an unbearable slowness. Every time my phone sounded, my heart turned a while thinking that Martín could be, although he rarely called during the day. I checked our photos on social networks, looking for signs that would have overlooked. Was there any suspicious comments? Any look that would not have noticed before? When I finally got home, I dedicated myself to preparing dinner mechanically. I made paella, Martín's favorite dish, although the idea of eating stirred my stomach. The rice happened to me a little while I was lost in my thoughts, looking out the window to the Plaza del Dos de Mayo, where the couples walked carefreely at the Madrid sunset. At 9 o'clock, I heard their keys at the door. Martín entered with his leather briefcase and his impeccable suit, as always. He kissed me on the cheek and began talking about a difficult case in court. I let him speak while the dinner served, observing each gesture, every inflection of his voice, looking for signs of deception. Finally, when we finished dinner and he was about to see the Real Madrid party, I took the letter of my pocket and put it on the table. "I need you to explain this," I said, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. I saw how blood left his face while reading. His hands, those hands that had tasted so many times, trembled slightly while holding the paper. This is a lie," he said finally, trying to smile, but his voice sounded hollow, fragile. "Someone wants to separate, Elena. Don't you see what a trap is?" I asked him who might want to do something like that, and why. His response was vague, mentioning competition in the firm, former unhappy clients. But there was something in his way of avoiding my gaze, how his fingers played nervously with the edge of the letter, which told me more, much more. "Are you telling me the whole truth, Martin?" I insisted, feeling how tears began to accumulate in my eyes. He got up abruptly, muttered something about needing air and left the room, leaving me alone with the distant sound of television and the overwhelming weight of the doubt. That night, while Martín pretended to sleep by my side, I looked at the roof of our room. The shadows projected by the street lamps danced on the walls, such as the thoughts that danced in my mind. Had he been any of my friends? Laura, who always joked at dinners? Isabel, my institute partner? Or maybe? No, I didn't want to consider some possibilities. I remembered how Martín and I had met in that art exhibition at the Reina Sofia Museum. He was admiring a Picasso work when we accidentally collided. He invited me to coffee at Gijón Café, and we talked for hours about art, literature, and our dreams. Had all that real? Or then there were other loves, other stories that I did not know. The hours passed while my mind reviewed every moment of our marriage, looking for cracks, signs that would have overlooked. Dawn found my eyes burning and heavy heart, knowing that nothing would be the same again. The days following the appearance of the letter became silent. The Madrid that loved so much, with its bustling streets and its terraces full of life, now looked like a grotesque scenario where each face hid a secret. Martín had changed, and not subtle. It started with small details. He no longer left his mobile on the table during dinner, as he had always done. He kept him in his pocket, and when he sounded, he went to the balcony to answer. His calls were brief and tense, and when he asked who he was, he responded with a vague "work" or "a client," avoiding looking into my eyes. The mornings in the corner coffee, where we used to have breakfast together before going to work, became silent and uncomfortable. The waiter, Paco, who knew us for years, threw me worried glances while serving our coffees with milk and churros. "Everything good, Elena?" I was wondering when Martín was ahead to go to work, but I could only force a smile and nod. In the institute, it was hard for me to concentrate on my literature classes. While explaining Bernarda Alba's house to my last-year students, I could not help seeing parallels between secrecy and the oppression of Lorca's work and my own situation. Maria, my most observant student, stayed after class one day. "Teacher, lately seems sad," he told me with genuine concern. I was moved by his sensitivity, but how to explain that my life was falling apart in silence? Martín began to arrive increasingly the firm. His excuses were always the same: an important client, a complicated case, a meeting that was extended. The potato stew that prepared for dinner cooled at the table while I waited, looking out the window towards the enlightened way, wondering where I would really be. One afternoon, while ordering the closet, I found a shirt that I did not recognize. It was new, from a face that Martín never bought. In the neck, there was a small carmine color stain. I sat on the bedroom floor, holding the shirt between my trembling hands, while the afternoon sun projected elongated shadows through the blinds. I tried to maintain the composure, continue with my routine as if nothing happened. I went to my classes, I bought the bread in the usual bakery, greeted the neighbors in the elevator. But inside, I consumed the anguish. Every time the phone rang, every time Martín received a message, I felt that my heart stopped. One day, I decided to try your reaction. We were watching silently, as it had become customary, when I casually mentioned, "Do you know? Rosario, the 4B, told me that they have new security cameras at the entrance of the building. Maybe we could check who left the letter." Martín's reaction was instantaneous and revealing. His fork fell on the plate with a metallic noise, and his face paled. "It is not necessary," he said with abruptness that surprised me. "I already told you that it is a lie, Elena. Why do you continue with this?" His defensive and aggressive tone only confirmed my suspicions. The Martin that I knew, the calm and reasonable man with whom he had married, would never have spoken to me like that. Something had changed, and that change had a name: although I still didn't know. But there was something else that worried me. My mother, Carmen, acted strangely. She, who had always been a strong and direct woman, now seemed to avoid certain issues. When he mentioned Martin, he looked away or changed conversation. At first I thought it was my imagination, but with the passing of the days, it became more evident. Carmen lived in the Chimberry neighborhood, a few streets from our apartment. We used to see each other several times a week, sharing coffee and confidences in its small terrace full of geraniums. But lately, every time I visited her, she found her distracted, as if she kept a secret that weighed. On Sunday, during our traditional family food, I noticed how I looked at Martín when he thought no one watched her. There was something in his gaze, guilt, worry. I couldn't decipher her, but he left me an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. The nights became endless. While Martín slept by my side, I remained awake, listening to the night sounds of Madrid, the last meter passing under our building, the distant laughs of the young people in the bars of Malesana, the occasional horn of a taxi. My mind spinning endlessly, connecting points that perhaps did not exist, building increasingly elaborate theories. I began to notice other changes in Martín. His clothes always smelled of different perfume, an aroma that was not the usual of his. He began to go to the gym in the afternoon, something that had never interested him before. New clothes were bought more frequently, and spent more time in front of the mirror in the morning. One afternoon, while I was in the San Miguel market buying ingredients for dinner, I saw Martín in the distance. I was sitting on a terrace, gesturing animatedly while talking on the phone. I approached quietly, hoping to listen to some of his conversation, but when he was about to reach it, he got up abruptly and lost between the crowd. The doubt had become my constant partner. He checked his shirts looking for deliveries, smelled his clothes in search of unknown perfumes. I even reviewed his bank extracts looking for suspicious expenses. I had become a person who did not recognize, a woman consumed by jealousy and distrust. The conversations with my mother became more tense. Carmen, who had always been my closest confidant, now seemed distant, as if she kept a secret that tormented her. When I told him about the anonymous letter, his reaction was strange. Instead of showing surprise or indignation, he was silent, staring at his cup of tea. Sometimes, he said finally, it is better not to know certain things. His words froze my blood. What did she know that I ignored? One night, while we had dinner at my parents' house, I observed an interaction between Martín and my mother who left me bewildered. It was something subtle, a look that lasted too long, an uncomfortable silence when their hands were touched when the salt passed. My father, absorbed in the football game on television, did not notice anything, but I felt that something did not fit. The days became weeks, and the weeks in a month of anguish and suspicions. Martin became more distant every day, and my mother more dodge. I began to lose weight, to sleep badly. My institute colleagues asked me if I was sick, worried about my dark circles and my lack of energy. One afternoon, while corrected exams in the teacher's room, I received a message from an unknown number. Ask your mother about March 15th. The date told me anything, but the message left me uneasy. What had happened that day? Why involve my mother in all this? I decided to investigate. I checked my agenda, looking for some clue on March 15th. It was the day Martín said he had an important work dinner, the day my mother canceled our usual Thursday snack without giving explanations. Coincidence? Martin's behavior became more erratic. One day I found him crying in his office, surrounded by messy papers. When I asked him what happened, he told me that it was the stress of work. But his eyes said something else, there was blame in them, and perhaps regret. The nights became a torment. Every time Martín moved in dreams, every time his phone vibrated, my heart accelerated. Who did I dream with? Who wrote to him at this time? The tension at home was unbearable. Our conversations were limited to the essentials: time, invoices, plans for the weekend that we both knew would not be made. The love that our relationship had built seemed to have evaporated, leaving only an empty shell of uncomfortable routines and silences. And my mother. Carmen, the woman who had always been my rock, my confidant, now seemed to carry an invisible weight on her shoulders. I surprised her looking at me with a mixture of pity and guilt that stirred my stomach. What did she know? What secret kept so jealously? That May night, the heat in Madrid was suffocating. I had slept early, but the dream gave me. The ceiling fan turned lazy, moving the hot air in the room while Martín faked sleep by my side. The silence of the night was only interrupted by the distant rumor of the last bars closing on Fuencarral Street and the occasional passage of a lonely car. Suddenly, an acre smell invaded the room. At first I thought it would be a neighbor burning something in his barbecue, although it was strange at that time. But there was something familiar in that smell, something that reminded me of my childhood: burned paper. The unmistakable aroma transported me instantly to those days when my father burned dry leaves in the garden of our old house on the outskirts. I got up carefully not to wake Martin, although I doubted he was really asleep. His breaths were too irregular, too conscious. I approached the window that gave to the inner courtyard of the building, that common space where the neighbors lay their clothes and my mother cultivated their plants in pots. The full moonlight weakly illuminated the patio, and there, in a corner, I saw something that froze my blood. Carmen, my mother, was standing next to a small fire. The flames illuminated their face with a ghostly glow while feeding the bonfire with what seemed to be papers. His figure, normally so familiar and comforting, projected disturbing shadows against the walls of the patio. I had never seen her like this, so focused on a task that seemed almost ritual. I put on a robe on the nightgown and lowered the stairs in silence. The building slept, only Don Manuel's television was heard on the second floor, probably watching a repeated party or one of those documentaries about the Civil War that he liked so much. Each step creaks under my bare feet, and the smell of burned paper became more intense as it descended. When opening the patio door, the heat of the small bonfire hit my face. Carmen was so absorbed in her task that she did not notice my presence immediately. His hands, which had comforted me so many times, now fed the flames with what seemed to be letters and photographs. The fire eagerly devoured every piece of paper she gave him, as if shared her urgency for destroying those secrets. Mother. My voice sounded weaker than what I intended, almost a whisper that was lost between the crackling of the flames. What are you doing? Carmen turned slowly, as if I had been waiting for my arrival. The firelight danced on his face, creating shadows that accentuated the wrinkles that he had never noticed on his face. For a moment, it seemed to see a stranger, but then he smiled, that smile that had always been my refuge, although now there was something different in it, something that I could not decipher. Some truths must be forgotten, daughter, he said with a serenity that baffled me. His voice was soft, almost maternal, as if he were explaining something simple and necessary. There are things that are better not knowing, secrets that must remain in the shadows. I approached the fire, trying to see what I was burning. Among the flames, I managed to distinguish fragments of paper writing, edges of photographs that were consumed, turned into black ashes that floated in the night air like small ghosts. The heat was intense, but more burning was my need to understand what was happening. What are those papers, Mom? I insisted, feeling how my heart accelerated with every second that passed. Why are you burning them at this time? Carmen continued to feed the fire, as if every roll she threw to the flames was part of an ancient and necessary ceremony. The past is like these flames, Elena. It consumes everything that touches, but can also purify. Sometimes, it is necessary to let some things become ashes to move forward. His words, enigmatic and disturbing, resonated in the silence of the patio. The fire was gently crepited, consuming secrets that I was beginning to fear. At that time, I heard a noise above. I looked up towards our window and I saw Martin's silhouette, watching us. When he noticed that he had seen it, he quickly turned away, as a surprised child doing something improper. "Does this have something to do with Martín?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. My mother's silence was more eloquent than any word. I saw how his hands trembled slightly while holding the next roll he was going to burn. Carmen stopped feeding the fire and sat on a stone bench in the patio, that same bank where we used to take the fresco on summer nights, sharing stories and laughs. He patted the space by his side, inviting me to sit. The heat of the bonfire reached us, mixing with the warm air of the Madrid night. "Elena," he began, his voice just a whisper that mixed with the crackling of the flames, "there are truths that are like knives. They cut deep and leave scars that never heal completely. As a mother, my instinct has always been to protect you from pain." "I am no longer a girl, Mom," I replied, feeling how tears began to form in my eyes. "You can't protect me from truth forever. You can't decide what I should know and what doesn't." The fire began to diminish, but the smell of burnt paper persisted, permeating the air with the aroma of destroyed secrets. In the silence of the night, we could listen to the bells of the Church of San Antonio de los Germans marking 3 in the morning, each bell resonating as a reminder of the time that escaped us. "Do you remember when you were little and fell from the bicycle in the retirement?" Carmen asked suddenly, her voice died of nostalgia. "You scored your knees and cried out inconsolated. I cleaned your wounds and told you that the pain would happen soon. And right?" I nodded, without understanding where I wanted to get with that memory of my childhood. The flames projected dancers on their face, causing their eyes to shine with unusual intensity. "But there are wounds that I can't clean with hydrogen peroxide and a whip," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "There are pain that I cannot cure with a kiss and a promise that everything will be fine. Some pains change us forever." The fire was just a glow, but its heat was still present, as a persistent reminder of the secrets that had become ashes. The embers shone like small red eyes in the dark, silent witnesses of our conversation. "What do you know about Martín?" I asked directly, tired of metaphors and evasive. "What's in those letters you are burning?" "I need to know, Mom. I deserve to know." Carmen closed her eyes for a moment, as if she were gathering strength for what she was going to say. When he opened them, I saw in them a mixture of pain and resignation that scared me. "There are things that a mother does to protect her daughter, Elena. Even when those things destroy her inside. Even when the price is her own peace." At that time, a street cat jumped into the patio, scaring both of us. The animal was cautiously approaching the dying fire, its eyes shining in the dark like 2 gold coins. He stopped next to the ashes, as if he also kept secrets that he would like to burn. "The anonymous letter," I started, feeling how the pieces began to fit in a puzzle that was not sure to complete. "Do you know who sent her?" My mother got up and began to spread the ashes with a stick, making sure that the fire was completely extinguished. His movements were methodical, as if he were performing a ritual that he had practiced many times in his mind. "Sometimes," he finally said, his voice mixing with the sound of the stick stirring the ashes, "the people we want most are the ones who can hurt us the most. And sometimes, love makes us do things that we never think we would do." Alba began to appear on the horizon, staining the sky of Madrid of pink and purple tones. The first birds began to sing, and in the distance the noise of the first meters of the day was heard, the city waking up a new day, oblivious to the dramas that were developed in our small patio. "Mom," I insisted, my strongest voice now, "I need to know the truth. What is happening between you and Martín?" Carmen stopped dry. His hands, stained with ash, trembled slightly while clinging to the stick. I saw her drink deeply, as if she were preparing to immerse himself in deep and dark water. "It's not so simple, Elena," he finally replied, his barely audible voice. "There are stories that are better to leave in the past, like these ashes. There are truths that can destroy more than build. But I couldn't accept more evasive. I got up and approached the still hot ashes. Among the carbonized remains, a paper fragment had partially survived. I bent down to pick it up, but Carmen was faster. "No." His voice sounded stronger than he intended, echoing in the silent courtyard. "Please, Elena. Let him be. Some ashes must remain as they are. Because..." My voice broke, tears finally falling down my cheeks. What can be so terrible that you need to destroy it in the middle of the night? What secret can be so dark that you prefer to burn it before sharing it with me? The sun began to look over the buildings, illuminating the patio with a new light. The shadows of the night backed down, but the secrets remained, heavy and dark as the ashes at our feet. The aroma of burned paper continued floating in the air, mixing with the smell of jasmine that came from the balcony of Mrs. Rosario. "He returns to bed, daughter," Carmen said softly, his voice full of a sadness that he had never heard before. "Tomorrow will be another day." But we both knew that nothing would be the same again. While climbing the stairs to my apartment, I felt the weight of the undesides on my shoulders. Each step seemed heavier than the previous one, as if he were ascending a mountain of doubts and unanswered questions. Martín pretended to sleep when I entered the room, but the slight tremor of his eyelids gave him away. I went to his side, feeling the smell of smoke in my hair and in my clothes, a tangible reminder of the secrets that had become ashes in the patio. The questions were spinning in my head like a whirlwind. What did my mother know? What connection was between her and Martín? What truths had become ashes in the courtyard of our building? The ceiling fan continued to turn lazily, moving the air loaded with secrets and lies. Madrid woke up to a new day, but for me, the night of the secrets just started. The ashes in the patio kept truths that threatened to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family, about my marriage, about my whole life. The days following the patio scene were silent torture. Carmen acted as if nothing had happened, preparing her famous potato tortillas for lunch and watering her geraniums like any other day. But I could not forget the fire, the ashes, and above all, his gaze when I asked him for Martín. I waited until my mother went out to make her purchases in the Wonders Market, as she did every Thursday morning. "They have the best fresh fish," I used to say, although I suspected that it was rather an excuse to chat with their lifelong friends. The market was its small social world, where it exchanged recipes and gossip with other neighborhood ladies. With the keys I kept for emergencies, I entered his floor. The apartment smelled like lavender and fresh coffee, aromas that I had always associated with my mother. The lace curtains that she had tissue let out the morning light, creating delicate patterns on the wooden floor. Everything was impeccably ordered, as always. I started in the living room, checking the drawers of the sideboard where I kept their important documents. I found old bills, medical recipes, some old photos of when I was little. In one of them, it appeared in the Retiro Park, with my first communion dress. My mother smiled at the camera, younger and more carefree. My father, who left us years ago, also appeared in the photo, with his characteristic mustache and his Sunday suit. I went to the main bedroom, that sacred space that had always been my mother's refuge. The built-in closet occupied a whole wall, with its dark wooden doors that had always screened a little when they opened them. Inside, the clothes were organized by colors, a custom that I had since I have memory. I started reviewing the upper shelves, where I kept the blankets and extras. It was then that my fingers played something different. Behind a stack of winter blankets, I found a wooden box. It was not very large, just the size of a book, but weighed more than it appeared. The wood was polished by the use, and had small marks of wear in the corners. A small golden lock, already oxidized by time, kept its secret safe. My heart accelerated when I remembered the old key that I had found years ago in a kitchen drawer. He had kept her, thinking that one day he would discover what he opened. I had it in my bag since then, as a talisman of unresolved mysteries. With trembling hands, I took it out and introduced it into the lock. It fit perfectly. When opening the box, the smell of old paper and saved secrets hit me like a wave. Inside was a brown leather diary, spent by time and use, along with a handful of cards tied with a weeding tape. I recognized my mother's lyrics on the newspaper deck, where I had simply written, 1985. I sat at the edge of the bed, the same place where my mother had comforted me so many times during my adolescence. The newspaper weighed in my hands as if it were made of lead. Did you have the right to read it? Wasn't this an invasion of your privacy? But then I remembered the fire in the patio, the evasive, the silences. The first pages were quite mundane, annotations about time, about their days at school where she worked as a teacher, about the little joys and sorrows of everyday life. But then, in mid-March, the tone changed. The lyrics became more hurtful, more emotional. Today I saw him again. I shouldn't feel this, it's not right. But when he looks at me, when he smiles, it's as if the world stopped. How could it be that just one look makes me feel like that? I have what to be strong, I have to think about Elena. My heart stopped for a moment. Was it possible? I kept reading, the pages passing faster and faster under my trembling fingers. The tickets became longer, more intense. My mother described casual encounters that did not seem casual at all, seemingly innocent conversations loaded with hidden meaning. And then, I saw it. Your name. Martin. My Martin. But this was impossible, the dates did not square. This diary was from long before I knew him. Or not. Martín came to school today with his niece. I was breathless when I saw him at the door of my class. He was wearing that gray suit that suits him so well, and his smile. My God, how can I feel this? He's too young, too, everything. Elena would never forgive me if she knew. The next pages were like a novel that I didn't want to read but couldn't put down. My mother described a secret romance, furtive encounters in coffee shops far from the neighborhood, stolen glances, whispered promises. Martín appeared in its pages as a different man from the one I knew, younger, more passionate, more impulsive. We cannot continue like this, he wrote in a June entry. He says he loves me, that he would give up everything for me. But how could I do this to my daughter? Elena is my life, my everything. And yet, every time I see him, every time he touches me. The letters tied with the ribbon told the rest of the story. They were from Martín, written on stationery from the law firm where he now worked. The first ones were full of passion, promises, plans for a future together. The last ones were different. Carmen, what we had was beautiful, but it can't continue. I met someone. Her name is Elena. My world collapsed at that moment. The words on the paper became blurry as tears began to fall. The last letter was the most recent, dated just a few months ago. I can't continue living with this guilt. Elena suspects something, but she doesn't know, she can't know that I was yours before hers. That in reality, I have never left to be completely. But she is your daughter, Carmen. Your daughter. How could we do this to her? The sound of keys in the door startled me. I quickly put the diary and letters in the box, but I didn't have time to return it to its hiding place. Carmen entered the room and was paralyzed when she saw me sitting on her bed, with the box on my lap. Elena. His voice was barely a whisper. The market bags fell to the ground, the oranges rolling across the floor like little balls of fire. Why, Mom? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Why him? Why my husband? Carmen leaned against the door frame, as if her legs couldn't support her. It wasn't like that, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. It's my husband, Mom. My husband. The words came out of my mouth like projectiles, each one loaded with years of deception and betrayal. "I knew him first," she said softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But he chose you. He chose you." I stood up, holding the diary like a shield. "And then? What happened next?" "Because according to this," I waved the cards in the air, "he never stopped being yours. You never stopped being his." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the window, I could hear the familiar sounds of the neighborhood, children playing in the street, the newsboy trumpeting the news, normal life continuing as if my world wasn't falling apart. "I tried," Carmen finally whispered. "I tried to keep it in the past, to bury it. But he came back. After your wedding, when things got difficult between you. He came back to look for me." The last pages of the diary were blank, as if the story had not yet ended. But I had already read enough. My mother's words, written in faded blue ink, had changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about my marriage, about my entire life. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked, although I wasn't really expecting an answer. "When were you going to tell me that my mother and my husband?" I couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of the truth was too great, too painful. The diary pages contained more than words, they contained the destruction of all my certainties, all my confidence, all my world. When I returned home that night, after discovering the diary, I found Carmen sitting on my couch. I wasn't surprised to see her there, somehow, I knew it would come. Martín was not at home, he had probably found out that I had found the diary and had decided to disappear. The atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension, like the thick air before a storm. "We need to talk," Carmen said, her voice firmer than she expected. She was not the same vulnerable woman he had seen hours before in her bedroom. There was something different about her, a determination I hadn't seen from her before. I sat on the couch in front of her, keeping my distance. The diary lay on the coffee table between us, a silent witness to decades of secrets. The light of the Madrid evening came through the windows, dyeing everything a golden color that made the scene seem unreal. "Yes, we need to talk," I responded, surprised by the calm in my own voice. "I need you to tell me everything, Mom. From the beginning." Carmen breathed deeply, her hands clasped in her lap. "I met Martín in 1985, at Colegio San Jose, where I taught. He came to pick up his niece, Ana. He was young, bright, he had just finished law school. Your father and I already had problems, although you were too young to notice." She paused for a moment, as if she were reliving those days in her mind. At first it was just casual conversations at the school gate. Then we started meeting, casually, at the commercial cafe. He made me feel alive again, Elena. She made me feel like I was more than a mother and an unhappy wife. The words came out of her mouth like a river held back for too long. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult day with your father, he invited me to have a drink at a bar. Malasana Bar. It was raining, you know. One of those spring storms that flood the streets of Madrid. We took refuge in a doorway, soaked, laughing like teenagers. And then he kissed me. I closed my eyes, trying not to visualize the scene. But Carmen continued, we started seeing each other secretly. He rented a small apartment in Lavapiés. I felt guilty, of course. Every time I saw you doing your homework at the kitchen table, every time you asked me why Dad and I weren't laughing together anymore. But I couldn't stop. The relationship lasted almost a year. It was intense, passionate, but also painful. We lived in constant fear of being discovered. Martín was 10 years younger than me, and at that time, that mattered much more than it does now. People were talking, making comments. He got up and walked to the window, looking out onto the street where life continued its normal course. One day, I decided it had to end. For you, mainly. You deserved a mother who could look you in the eyes without shame. I told him we couldn't continue seeing each other. Martín understood, or at least I thought so. Years passed. Your father left us, you grew up, you became a beautiful and independent woman. And then one day, you walked into the house with a radiant smile and told me that you had met someone special. His voice broke slightly. When I saw him walk through that door, when I saw how he looked at you, my world stopped. It was Martin. My Martin. But it wasn't mine anymore, was it? He looked at you like he'd never looked at me before. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What could I say? That years before you had had an affair with the man you were falling in love with. That I had betrayed your father, our family, for him. I saw you so happy, Elena. I couldn't destroy that. She turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I thought I could handle it. That he could watch you marry him, share family meals, act like everything was normal. And for a while, it worked. Martín and I kept our distance, we treated each other with a cold, appropriate cordiality. But then, 2 years ago, when you and he were going through that bad patch, he came to see me one night. He had been drinking. He told me that he had never forgotten me, that he had married you trying to find in you what he had lost with me. The words hit me like slaps. Carmen continued, her voice now weaker, it was just one night, Elena. A night of weakness, of memories, of what could have been and was not. The next day, we both agreed that it had been a terrible mistake. We swore it would never happen again. But someone found out. I don't know who, or how. Maybe he saw us enter or leave the apartment. The thing is, that person decided that you deserved to know the truth, and sent you the anonymous letter. He approached me, trying to take my hands, but I moved away. When I saw the letter, when I saw how you were starting to get suspicious, I was shocked. Panic. I began to burn all the evidence, the old letters, the photos, everything that could reveal the truth. But I kept the diary. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew that one day we would have this conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. The sounds from the street came muffled, the horn of a car, the laughter of children playing, normal life continuing as my world fell apart. Do you still love him? I finally asked. Carmen closed her eyes, as if the question caused her physical pain. Love doesn't go away, Elena. It transforms, it hides, but it never completely disappears. What I felt for Martín was different from anything I had felt before. But the love I feel for you is stronger, deeper. You're my daughter. A daughter you betrayed, I replied, the words coming out like poison. Yes, he admitted, and the simple honesty of that answer disarmed me. I betrayed you. I betrayed your trust, your love, everything a mother should be. I don't expect you to forgive me, Elena. I just hope that one day you can understand. She stood up slowly, as if each movement cost her an immense effort. There is something else you should know, she said, taking an envelope from her bag. Martín wrote this to me a week ago. He says that he is going to leave the firm, that he is going to Barcelona. He says he can't continue living with this lie. He left the envelope on the table, next to the diary. Everything that's happening is my fault, Elena. I was the one who didn't know how to set limits, who didn't know how to protect you as I should. But Martin, he loves you. In his own twisted and complicated way, but he loves you. And that should make me feel better. No, Carmen replied, heading toward the door. Nothing I can say will make this hurt any less. I just wanted you to know the whole truth. I owed you. The kitchen clock struck 10 at night. Madrid was still alive outside our windows, oblivious to the drama unfolding in our small apartment. Carmen paused at the door, her hand on the knob. do you know what the worst thing about all this is? I said before he left. That during all these years, every time I told you about my problems with Martín, every time I told you my insecurities, my fears, you knew. You knew exactly why he was like this, why he sometimes seemed so distant, so lost in thought. And you didn't say anything. I know, she answered softly. And I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life. The door closed behind her, leaving me alone with the weight of revealed truths. On the table, the envelope and the newspaper seemed to mock me, guardians of more secrets that I wasn't sure I wanted to know. That night, after Carmen's confession, I was left alone in the apartment, surrounded by photographs that now looked like framed lies. Every image of Martín. And every moment that I thought was special, was stained by a previous story that I didn't know. The envelope that Carmen had left was still on the table, intact. I didn't know if I wanted to read more truths. Around midnight, I heard the keys in the lock. And for the first time, I really saw him. Not as my husband, not as the man I thought I knew, but as the man who had loved my mother long before he knew me. He stopped when he saw me sitting in the dark, with the diary and his letters scattered on the table. Elena. He started, but I raised a hand to stop him. Sit down, I said, surprised by the firmness of my voice. We need to talk. He sat in front of me, in the same place where Carmen had been hours before. The light from the street came through the window, drawing shadows on his face that seemed to underline every line of guilt. The kitchen clock showed 12:30, and the silence of the Madrid night was only interrupted by the occasional passing of a car on the street. Carmen has told me everything, I continued. But I want to hear it from you. I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me why you married me when you were still in love with my mother. Martín ran his hands over his face, a gesture I had seen him do 1,000 times when preparing a difficult case. But this time there were no legal arguments that could save him, no technicalities to hide behind. It's not that simple, he began, and I almost laughed at how familiar that phrase sounded. It was the same thing that Carmen had said. When I met you, Elena, I was trying to forget her. Years had passed since we had, and you were like a ray of light. So different from her, so full of life and innocence. So you used me to forget her. My voice sounded calm, almost clinical, although inside I felt like I was falling apart. No. He leaned forward, trying to take my hands, but I pushed them away. It wasn't like that. I fell in love with you, Elena. Really. You were everything I needed, everything I wanted. But you couldn't forget her, I said, it wasn't a question. Martín sank into the chair. I tried. God knows I tried. For years it worked. We were happy, weren't we? We had a good life together. A life built on lies, I responded, taking one of our wedding photos. Did you think about her when we got married? When you promised to love and respect me? When we danced our first dance while she watched us? Every day, he finally admitted, and his honesty was like a dagger. Every day I thought about her, about what could have been, about what we sacrificed. But I also thought about you, about how much I loved you, about the life we were building. And 2 years ago. When did you go looking for her? My voice cracked slightly. Martín closed his eyes, as if the memory physically hurt him. We were bad, you and I. We barely spoke to each other. I felt lost, confused. One night, after too many drinks at the law firm's bar, I found myself in front of his door. And she let you in, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Yes, he replied simply. It was a terrible mistake. We both knew it immediately. The guilt has been consuming us ever since. I got up and walked to the window. Madrid slept under a starry sky, oblivious to the dramas that were unfolding behind its illuminated windows. How many other stories like ours were hidden behind those facades? Do you know what the worst is? I said, without turning to look at him. That all these years, every time I saw you distant, every time I noticed that something wasn't right, I thought it was my fault. That I wasn't enough, that I wasn't good enough. Elena, no. And all this time, I continued, ignoring her interruption, it was her. It was always her. Every time she came to dinner, every Christmas, every birthday. You were putting on a play, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. I turned to him. Do you still love her? Martín also stood up, taking a few steps towards me. I don't know, he finally said. What I feel for Carmen is complicated. It's a mixture of love, guilt, regret. But what I feel for you is real, Elena. You are my wife, my life. No, I said softly. Not anymore. I took off my wedding ring and left it on the table, next to the diary that had changed everything. The small golden circle glittered in the moonlight, a final reminder of promises broken and secrets revealed. Elena, please, his voice sounded desperate. We can get through this. We can go to therapy, we can. Get over this. Now I did laugh, a humorless laugh. How do you get over something like that, Martín? How do I trust you again? In her. How do I look into their eyes again without seeing betrayal? I'm sorry, he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry. Me too, I replied, grabbing my bag. I'm sorry we wasted so many years on a lie. I'm sorry you didn't have the courage to be honest with me from the beginning. And I'm sorry that the love you said you felt for me wasn't enough to keep you away from her. Where are you going? I need time, I said, heading for the door. Time to think, to process all this. Don't call me, don't look for me. You've done enough. Elena, wait, he took a step towards me, but I stopped him with a look. One last question, I said, hand on the doorknob. If you could go back, would you change anything? Would you have married me knowing you could never forget her? The silence that followed was all the answer he needed. I left the apartment without looking back, leaving behind me 15 years of marriage, a mother I no longer recognized, and a man who had never been completely mine. The Madrid night welcomed me with its characteristic bustle. Somewhere, someone was playing flamenco on a guitar, and the melancholic sound accompanied me as I walked aimlessly through the streets I knew so well. The same streets where Martín and my mother had lived their forbidden love, where I had built a life based on lies. I took out my phone and booked a room at a downtown hotel. Tomorrow I would have to face reality, make decisions, rebuild my life. But for tonight, I just wanted to get lost in the anonymity of the city, to be one more among the millions of stories that Madrid kept in its cobblestone streets. The alliance that he had left on the table would be the last witness of a story that should never have been, of a love that was born marked by betrayal, and of a truth that, like the ashes in the patio, could never again be what it was.